this video, we are going to talk about what led up to this point in the conversation. We're going to talk about one specific pattern and we're going to workshop it and see how can we improve it, how can we make it be a little bit more advanced. And then we're going to talk about if you are a new knitter and you want to be a knitwear designer, what can you do to educate yourself to make sure your designs are great. A few weeks ago, I made a video discussing the new wave of bad knitting patterns that I've noticed online, and some great discussion happened in the comments. The amount of dialogue on that video tells me that this is a conversation that we as knitters need to be having and should continue to have so that we can learn and improve. There was also a video response by a knitter named Eva. I'll go ahead and I'll link her video in the description so you can check it out for yourself. She comments on laziness as a potential byproduct of American culture, informed by her study abroad one semester here. She also explains that she sees knitting patterns, even poorly written ones, as part of the learning process of creative expression, and that knitters should puzzle their way through the pattern in the spirit of learning something new. She also makes the interesting point that the market should autocorrect. So if there is someone putting out bad knitting patterns, people won't continue to buy them and the problem should regulate itself. Definitely click that link and check her out because she goes into much more detail than I just did. In my original video, I discussed bad knitting patterns and I described newbie knitwear designers. And in a nutshell, I explained that I think that there's a problem with folks who have not been knitting that long, 1 or 2 years, who decide to design knitting patterns, because I see designing knitting patterns as an advanced level skill, as a separate skill from knitting in itself. In my previous video, I mentioned the proliferation of bad knitting patterns is a sort of pyramid scheme. New knitters copy an already flawed pattern and pass along those flaws, sometimes amplifying them. And I didn't use specific names or call out any specific designers in that video, although it's interesting that many of you in the comments thought I was talking about petite knit, but I think we have an opportunity here because Eva created this video, and in her video, she expressed a strong desire and an urge to learn and to grow. She acknowledged that she is a fairly new knitter. She put a little note in her description of her video, inviting anyone to take a look at her patterns and let her know what they think. And so in the spirit of learning and improvement, as Eva described in her own video, I thought it might be interesting to take a look at her free pattern together to see how it may be emblematic of what a new knitter who delves into knitwear design might create, some of the challenges there. I want to emphasize that the point of this exercise is not to call anybody out or to live in negativity. The point of this exercise is to learn about how knitting patterns can improve, what takes a knitting pattern from kind of a beginner level to a more advanced level, and hopefully those notes and those insights can help all newer knitters who aspire to be designers to create a product that they can be super proud of, that's really easy to follow, easy to understand, and error-free. And we're gonna include a lot of resources so that if you are a new knitter, you wanna be a designer, you can start to build up your skill set to put out really excellent patterns yourself. And I wanna thank Eva for participating in this activity with me, for being willing to be critiqued, for being willing to learn. I think those are really important qualities for everyone to have. And so I really appreciate you, Eva. It's so awesome. We're like lifting people up here. We're helping her out. We're highlighting her work for everyone to check out. We're helping people learn, all positive stuff. And with the mentality of a teacher, we're going into this, okay? Okay, why am I qualified to look at Eva's pattern and to give a critique or make a commentary on knitting patterns becoming bad? I did make a video on my experience and history in the knitting industry, and I'll go ahead and I'll link that here so you can watch kind of like my whole story of how I worked in the knitting industry as a knitting book editor up here. So let's start on Eva's designer page. Here she is, and she has 2 patterns in her Ravelry store. She's got the Ladybug scarf and the small stupid hat. Now, the Ladybug scarf is her free pattern, so we're gonna dive in there, and I'm gonna go ahead and download this and take a look. Very cute, love the red color. This kind of reminds me right off the bat of the Sophie scarf vibe. We were seeing these little kind of neckerchief scarves, I'd say, popping up, and they're fun. They're a great stash buster. You could use a little bit of very special yarn. I think that's great. I'm seeing a very minimalist vibe here. So we've decided to go with both written instructions and charted instructions. I love that you include the stitch counts here. I think we should jump right ahead to the chart because frankly, if I were knitting this scarf, this is what I would be using to knit from. Eva, in your video, you mentioned that simple, straight to the point patterns can be really wonderful to work from and that not all patterns need to be for all people. And so I wonder why you made the choice to include the written out instructions because they do visually seem like a lot coming off the page. Just a thought. So immediately taking a look at this chart, this pattern has an increase section and then it repeats all the way up and then you have a decrease section. And one thing that I don't see on your chart is the dark bold lines that generally indicate a repeat. I think that one thing you could do to make this pattern clearer, indicate that the center section is repeated with a dark bold box around those stitches. That will immediately indicate to the person looking at this chart, oh yeah, I'm just going to increase all this way, and then I'm going to repeat what's inside here, and then I'm going to decrease. The very first few stitches, you have 2 stitches out to the sides and 2 stitches in the middle. Now, when we use a knitting chart, almost always, I think always, the grayed out stitches indicate nothing being there, and the white stitches indicate knitted fabric. And usually those white stitches are touching each other, or you might see a vertical line or two of grayed out stitches that indicate there aren't stitches here right now, but they may be coming later. By putting these stitches all the way out to the side, my eye actually doesn't look at them because I'm just looking at the center of your chart at the white stitches that are touching each other as the fabric. There shouldn't be a wide berth or a wide gap here. I would move those increased stitches in to touch the chart so that universally any knitter could look at this chart and understand what they're reading. Someone commented and said, "It took me 3 times to cast this project on because I did not understand the chart. The beginning of the chart for the increase section confused me due to the edge stitches in red along the sides of the chart. These red boxes are actually stitches that you want the knitter to complete." Now that does not show up in your key for your chart. And so as a knitter who's not used to seeing kind of like red edge stitches indicated that way, but also is not used to seeing stitches that aren't touching the main fabric, I would completely have ignored those. I would not have known that those were stitches you wanted me to knit. So what I would do is I would bring those edge stitches in to touch the fabric. I would not make them red. They definitely indicate in the key those slip stitches, whether that be popping that red stitch into the key and saying this is the slip stitch borders. Often it's like a horizontal line that indicates a slip stitch in charts. Charts can kind of vary in their iconography. I would definitely indicate those slip stitches so people are able to follow along stitch by stitch in your chart. After taking a look at these charts, it got me thinking, if you've been knitting 1 or 2 years, anything that you design is going to be iterative, meaning it'll probably be inspired by, whether lightly or heavily, something else that you've knit. Because it takes a long, long time to knit enough and to gain enough expertise to knit something without drawing from someone else's work. I assume that this scarf project that you created is somehow iterative. So let's take a look back at your project page and let's figure out where this scarf came from. Here we go. So here's your project page. Here's everything you've knit. You've been knitting since January 2023, so just about 2 years. And I'm noticing you knit a bunch of sweaters to start. You worked your way up through a couple of other things, but I'm looking specifically for like, what is the scarf that inspired your scarf? I initially thought it might be the Sophie scarf from Petite Knit just because the kind of shape and size was so similar, but I actually think it was something else. I see you've knit the Soul Sister scarf, but I actually think that you were inspired here by the Pia scarf. And I think it's interesting that you knit the Pia scarf and then you immediately created your design, the Ladybug scarf. So one came right before the other. So let's take a look at the Pia scarf. I am going to take a leap and say that probably you knit the Pia scarf and you were inspired. You had already knit the Sari Nordlund little scarflet. You knit this one and then you were like, I think I can make my own. I'm just thinking out loud here. I could be wrong. I could be totally wrong. This is not an accusation. This is not a negative thing. It is natural that as a newer knitter, if you are creating a design, it will be iterative. It must be iterative. By definition, you have to follow in someone else's footsteps. And even I, who is not a knitwear designer, briefly during my time in publishing, I did publish 2 knitwear designs because we were working on a book at the time, a mini skein knits book. We were looking for different people to submit designs to the book, and I offered to create some. I created a shawl pattern for that book. That shawl pattern was iterative because at the time I had only knit shawls from Isolde Teague, who I love, adore, and so my shawl design is iterative of her shawl design. She used a garter tab, so I used a garter tab. She used a rib of yarn overs, I used a rib of yarn overs. I wasn't reinventing the wheel, okay? I'm not accusing you of anything. Today, would I approach shawl design the same way 10 years later? I might have the ability to be more creative with my design and to not be as iterative as I was when I was a newer knitter. So we see that here. So we see the parallels in your pattern, and very interestingly, we see the charts broken up and we see the red stitches. So it becomes kind of clear where that is coming from in your charts. Now, interestingly, I think that this designer is using those border stitches. Yep, knit one, slip one with yarn in front, which is the same edging in the Ladybug scarf. Here we kind of start to see how the Ladybug scarf is iterative of the Pia scarf. And so in my video, I used the term pyramid scheme. Some of you got kind of frustrated, but this is exactly what I'm talking about. One major problem with this iterative design by new knitters is that some of the functionality in the Pia scarf gets watered down, twisted, and kind of made less effective and more confusing in the Ladybug scarf. So we have this border. The Pia scarf is just 3 grayed out stitches. It doesn't have any iconography in them, which maybe we could change, but the Ladybug scarf takes those stitches without the iconography, moves into the outsides of the chart where they're not touching the main fabric, and it becomes even more confusing. Then we see that use of color. So some of the stitches are blocked out in red. I actually think this is very effective in the Pia scarf because it helps a newer knitter to understand what the texture is they're going to see in the fabric of their scarf and read their knitting more easily. But in the Ladybug scarf, those red stitches in the edges just look like they're not part of the project. And the general design, yeah, it's just a long scarflet. That's not so crazy, but we see the same rib design and it starts to become an echo of itself.
And then Eva, who's a new knitter, followed Domenika's pattern. She thought, I can utilize this shape and I can make my own thing. And so you did. It's iterative. Is it plagiarism? No, it is not plagiarism because you are creating a unique take and a unique spin on this pattern. And then someone else who follows you is going to take your pattern, which is free, and they are going to create their own iteration. And perhaps their chart will be even harder to read than yours. And that's how we start to go down a slippery slope. This is what I was warning about. Domenika also does not use repeat lines. Let's just take a pause. First of all, this is not restricted just to Eva. We're using her as a case study, as an example of something that's happening all over the online knitting world. Is that people who are newer knitters decide to dive into knitwear design, and the product they produce isn't as clean, isn't as readable, isn't as accessible as it should or could be because they just don't have the experience to be creating knitwear design, which is a different skill and it's a higher level skill, right? I, after leaving the knitting industry, became a teacher, and I have my master's in teaching English to speakers of other languages. I think that teaching English and speaking English are two different things. Just because you can speak English doesn't mean you can teach it. Being able to knit doesn't mean that you're able to design. It is a separate skill. It is a skill that needs to be learned over time. It is a skill that you could be trained in. So let's empower you today. If you are a new knitter who felt called out because you saw my video and you thought, oh no, I wanted to become a knitwear designer and now I feel like Deborah's telling me I can't. I'm not telling anybody not to do anything. But there are steps that you can take to ensure the product that you put out is exceptional, or is at least of the quality that we would hope one would put out, in order for other people to use their instructions and certainly to spend money for them. So if you want to become a knitwear designer, here's what I would recommend and how I would suggest you dive in and get started to ensure that you do your due diligence and produce an excellent product. First of all, are you, like we saw in this video, modifying or creating an iteration of an existing pattern? Because if that is what you are doing, I would argue it may not need to be a standalone pattern at all. In a world before Instagram, in a world before the commodification of knitting, where everyone really felt the need to make this into a money-making scheme and not just a hobby, people were posting their modifications in the Ravelry notes of their project page. And so rather than create your own design, if you are creating an iterative version of another person's project, could you put those notes, even if they are dramatic difference from that initial pattern, could you put those notes in your pattern notes on Ravelry? That's kind of what we used to do, and sometimes it would look like a completely different project by the time the person was done with it. But especially if you're creating an iterative design, I think that that's kind of where it belongs until you get to a level where you're able to really call it your own. Eva argued in her video, how do we expect people to get better if we don't give them space to be bad at something first? And I totally agree with you. I would argue that the best place to be bad at pattern design is not necessarily in your own designs. I think the best place to learn and experiment and be bad before you're good is in the pattern notes on Ravelry. Now I would ask the question, have you taken a course? Have you learned pattern design? There are amazing places, just as Eva discussed in her video, to self-educate online. Designers should self-educate just as Eva suggested knitters should. I'm going to drop a bunch of links in the description of this video of different online courses you can look up so that we all have a concentrated place to look and get lots and lots and lots and lots of resources to learn how to design knitwear, right? Let's empower each other to write better patterns. Let's not be complacent with bad patterns. Let's learn how to do it. Reading a pattern and working from a pattern doesn't necessarily mean that you can write a pattern until you learn how to do it. I would also say read up. There are a few knitters whose writing transformed my ability to understand patterns. Elizabeth Zimmerman, Knitting Without Tears, Barbara Walker, Knitting from the Top, Maggie Rigetti, Sweater Design in Plain English, Isola Teague, Little Red in the City, and Isola's blog is an amazing font of knowledge. See what they have to say, learn from them, because they are going to inform your ability to design knitting patterns much more comprehensively than just knitting will do. I'm going to, again, link all of those resources in the description of this video, if you are a knitter who has some recommended reading for those who want to be designers, drop that information in the comments. I will migrate all of your recommendations into that description box. We can have a nice comprehensive resource. And I think the most important piece of advice I could give to any aspiring designer: hire a tech editor. Please, please hire a tech editor. I'm sorry to tell you that test knitters are just a glorified free publicity team.
I know a lot of you are test knitters and you take your jobs extremely seriously. I think your work is important, and I don't think you can replace a tech editor. I'm sorry.
All of these newbie knitwear designers who I was speaking about in my last video, I would bet real money that they did not hire a tech editor. They're going to fix all the mistakes. They're going to make sure all the math works out. They're going to make sure that your pattern follows the conventions that are standard. They're invaluable. I can't even put a price on it. And they will cost you money because they deserve to be compensated for their hard work. And I think a lot of these newbie knitwear designers are kind of like hoping to make a buck potentially, but definitely not hoping to spend a buck. But in order to put out a good product, you have to have a tech editor. Even if you don't take a class, even if you don't read those books that I recommended, even if you've only been knitting 2 years and you have an idea for a pattern, that tech editor is going to make your pattern read as if an advanced knitter wrote it. They're worth it. Get a tech editor. So we have already been talking for a while. I want to just re-emphasize and restate one more time that the point of this video is not to call anyone out, and is certainly not to dwell in negativity. The point of this video is to illustrate what do I mean when I explain that newer knitters are putting out poor quality knitwear patterns. And what can you do if you are a newer knitter who aspires to be a designer to educate yourself and ensure you have the tools to put a quality product out there. So that's the point of this video. I really, really hope that you all receive it that way. We are here to learn together, that we're here to improve together, and we're here to ensure that our community continues to hold a high standard for knitwear designers who are selling us a product, and that we are not enabling the production of poor products and poor designs in the name of creative expression. We want to make sure that if someone is calling themselves a designer and putting a product out there and certainly charging for it, that they're putting out a product that's good quality. We don't want to lower that bar, in my opinion. Let me know if you think I'm wrong. But hopefully we can put together a good resource list in this description. So like if you're a new knitter who wants to be a designer, don't be embarrassed, don't be upset, like go for it. But educate yourself first. If you found this video helpful, let me know. And if you found it unhelpful, I know you'll let me know. Either way. We'll talk soon. Hit the subscribe button if you like this video so you don't miss the next one. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.